In any regulated laboratory, the reliability of your analytical instruments is paramount. That's where qualification comes in. Today, we're diving into the essential process of qualifying your high-performance liquid chromatography, or HPLC, system. HPLC is a cornerstone technique in pharmaceutical analysis, chemical research, and many other fields. It precisely separates compounds in a liquid mixture. But how do you know your HPLC is working correctly? That's where qualification ensures your instrument consistently delivers accurate and dependable results. Why is qualification so crucial? Data integrity. It confirms the accuracy and reliability of your data, which is critical for decision-making, regulatory compliance, and scientific validity. Regulatory compliance. In industries like pharmaceuticals, regulatory bodies like the FDA mandate instrument qualification. Reproducibility. Qualification ensures your HPLC produces consistent results over time and across different operators. Troubleshooting. It establishes a baseline for performance, making it easier to identify and resolve problems. The qualification process is broken down into 4 key stages. 1. Design qualification, DQ. This confirms that the HPLC system you select meets your specific requirements and intended use. It's like checking if you bought the right tool for the job. 2. Installation qualification, IQ. This verifies that the HPLC system is installed correctly according to the manufacturer's specifications. This includes proper connections, environmental conditions, and software installation. 3. Operational qualification, OQ. This demonstrates that the HPLC system performs as expected within its operating range. You'll test key parameters like pump flow rate, detector accuracy, and temperature control. 4. Performance qualification, PQ. This confirms that the entire system, including the instrument, software, and your specific analytical method, consistently produces reliable results for your particular application. Key considerations for successful HPLC qualification. Documentation. Meticulous record keeping is essential. Document every step of the process, including protocols, results, and any deviations. Calibration. Ensure all reference standards and any measuring devices used in the qualification process are properly calibrated. Training. Personnel performing qualification must be adequately trained and qualified. Maintenance. Regular maintenance and preventive maintenance are critical for keeping the HPLC system in a qualified state. Change control. Any changes to the system, software, or analytical method must be assessed for their potential impact on the qualified state. Qualification isn't a one-time event. Over time, instrument performance can drift. Requalification or periodic checks are necessary to maintain confidence in your results. The frequency depends on factors like instrument usage, the criticality of the application, and regulatory requirements. Want to stay up to date with the latest GMP insights and guidance? Then make sure to subscribe to our channel. We've got tons more helpful content coming your way. Hit that subscribe button and join the GMP Guide community. Design qualification. Before purchasing an HPLC, define your needs. What types of samples will you analyze? What separation performance do you require? Does the instrument meet relevant regulatory standards? DQ is usually performed by the user, sometimes in collaboration with the vendor. Installation qualification. When the HPLC arrives, follow the manufacturer's instructions meticulously. Document everything: serial numbers, installation dates, and any environmental conditions. Verify that all components are correctly installed and that the system is ready for operation. Performance qualification. PQ is application specific. You'll use your actual samples and analytical method to demonstrate that the HPLC system consistently produces reliable results in your lab environment. This often involves analyzing known standards and assessing factors like accuracy, precision, and repeatability.
All right, let's talk about something that sounds super technical, but is actually critical for our health and safety. We're diving into the world of equipment qualification. You know, in fields like pharmaceuticals or medical devices, you can't just plug in a new machine and hope for the best. Making sure it works perfectly isn't just a good idea, it's a science, and it's all about documentation. So let's get into it.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to start big picture. Why do these tiny details matter so much? Then we'll meet the three heroes of our story: IQ, OQ, and PQ. We'll get hands-on with a real-world case study, a simple lab scale, and we'll drill down into what it really means to calibrate for confidence. After that, we'll zoom back out to look at the real-world tug-of-war between business and quality. And finally, we'll talk about the seriously high cost of getting this wrong.
So really, why all the fuss? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, it's because when your product might end up in someone's medicine or even inside their body, good enough is a recipe for disaster. Patient safety isn't something you can compromise on, and that whole chain of safety starts with the very first piece of equipment. And this quote right here just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. A tiny, tiny miscalculation, a temperature that's off by half a degree, a part that's not installed perfectly. These aren't small mistakes. They're like little seeds that can grow into massive failures down the road. And that is exactly why these industries have this super rigorous, proven system. Okay, so what is this system? Well, the solution is a 3-step process, and it all comes down to 3 sets of letters: IQ, OQ, and PQ. And trust me, these are not just some corporate buzzwords. They are the absolute bedrock of proving that a piece of equipment can be trusted to do its job. To make this super simple, let's think about something we can all get behind: a really nice professional espresso machine in a coffee shop. Installation qualification, or IQ, is basically the setup. Did you get all the right parts? Is the plumbing hooked up right? Is it on a level counter? Then you've got operational qualification, or OQ. This is where you test its core functions. Does it heat water to exactly the right temperature? Does it push it through with exactly the right pressure? And finally, performance qualification, PQ. This is the real test. Can you make a dozen perfect lattes, one after another, during that chaotic morning rush? Can it perform under real-world pressure? So if we map that coffee analogy onto the formal process, you can see how it all flows together logically. First, you prove it's installed right. Then you test its basic functions. And finally, you prove it works in the real world. You can't jump to step 2 without nailing step 1. It's a chain, right? An unbroken chain of evidence that shows everything is working exactly as it should.
So for IQ, the most important 2 words are documented verification. This is not just about plugging the thing in and seeing if the lights come on. No way. It's about creating a bulletproof paper trail that proves every single wire, screw, and software version is exactly what it's supposed to be.
All right, next up, OQ. This is where we kick things up a notch. The really crucial part here is testing across its anticipated operating ranges. What's that mean? It means you have to push the equipment to its limits. You test it at the highest setting, the lowest setting, and everywhere in between to prove it's reliable, not just in the sweet spot, but at the extremes too.
And that brings us to PQ, the final boss. This is where the rubber really meets the road. We're not just testing the machine anymore. We're testing it as part of the whole process, with real materials, with real people running it, to prove that it can do the job not just once, but over and over again, consistently and reproducibly.
Okay, theory is great, but let's make this real. Let's get our hands dirty. We're going to apply this whole IQ, OQ, PQ framework to one of the most common and most important pieces of lab gear out there, the analytical balance. You know, those super sensitive scales that can measure stuff down to a speck of dust?
And we're not just making this up. We're actually going to peek inside a real-world IQ protocol document. This isn't some classroom exercise. This is the kind of meticulous paperwork that makes sure one of these scales is good to go from the second it comes out of the box. And when you look at the checklist, you see just how deep this goes. It's exhaustive. They check the environment it's in, the power it's getting. They make sure every single component is there. They even identify the right operating procedures. And maybe most importantly, if anything at all is off, there's a formal process to document it and fix it. Nothing gets swept under the rug.
Now, with something like a scale, one part of this whole process is absolutely everything: calibration. I mean, you can have 1,000 pages of documentation, but if the number on that little screen is wrong, none of it matters. So how do you know the measurement is accurate?
Well, there are 2 main ways to do it. You've got internal calibration. It's convenient, the balance has a tiny weight inside and can check itself with the push of a button. But that weight usually isn't certified, and it only tests one specific point. Then you've got external calibration. This is the gold standard. A trained technician uses a special set of certified weights to test the balance across its entire range. It's manual, for sure, but it gives you a much more complete picture of its accuracy.
And when I say certified weights, I am not kidding. These things are serious business. They're not just random chunks of metal. They come in different accuracy classes. For high-precision lab balance, you'd likely use an F1 class weight. Look at that. A 1-gram F1 weight has to be accurate to within 1/10 of a milligram. That's the incredible level of precision we're dealing with here.
So it all comes down to this number, 0.10%. According to the United States Pharmacopoeia, which is like the rule book for this industry, if you have to accurately weigh something, your total measurement uncertainty can't be more than 0.10%. That one little number drives this entire process. It's the standard. It's the benchmark that everything has to meet.
Okay, so this all sounds great on paper, right? It's perfectly logical, perfectly safe, but we all know the real world is messy, and these perfect protocols often run headfirst into a very human problem, the nonstop pressure to get things done faster. So let's zoom back out and talk about that tension.
At life science consultant Devin Mack just absolutely nails the issue with this quote. He points out that when deadlines are breathing down your neck, what's the first thing to go? It's the slow, tedious, meticulous documentation. Teams start to cut corners, they skip steps, and they rush ahead without really truly knowing what their equipment is capable of. And he adds another really interesting layer here. He talks about this cultural shift. Maybe 30 years ago, the engineering departments, the people who live and breathe this stuff, had more of a say. But today, he argues, it's often the commercial teams, the ones focused on speed to market, who are driving the bus. This creates this constant tug of war between doing it fast and doing it right. So what happens when that tug of war is lost by the quality side? What happens when steps are skipped, when documents are fudged, when unqualified equipment is used to make a product? Well, the cost of that failure can be absolutely staggering. And don't think for a second that regulators like the FDA are unaware of these pressures. Oh, they know. In fact, their scrutiny has only gotten more intense. Programs like the FDA's data integrity audit exist for this exact reason, often created in response to huge scandals like the Able Laboratories fraud case in 2005, where they uncovered widespread data falsification. When these processes fail, it's not just a business problem, it's a full-blown regulatory nightmare. And that really brings us back to the one question that matters most. Your equipment might be humming along, the lights are on, it looks like it's working, but is it qualified? Can you prove it with objective, documented evidence? Because when you're making products that people rely on for their health, qualification isn't just about checking a box for compliance. It's about confidence, and that's everything.
All right, let's talk about something that is at the absolute heart of good science, instrument qualification. Now I know, it can sound a little dry, but what if I told you it's pretty much the only thing standing between you and data you just can't trust? Today we're going to break it all down, step by step, and make this whole process super practical. Take a look at this machine. It might just look like a complex box with some tubes, but this, a gas chromatographer, is an absolute workhorse in labs everywhere. I mean, this is the kind of technology that tells us if our medicine is safe, if our water is clean. These instruments are making critical decisions for us every single day.
And that leads us to the biggest question of all, right? This machine spits out a number. How do we know we can believe it? I mean, really, truly know. How do we prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that its results are accurate, reliable, and completely trustworthy?
Well, what we're all chasing here is something called data integrity. And the gold standard, the rulebook for this, is a framework called Alcoa Plus. It's basically a checklist for trustworthy data. It needs to be attributable. We know who did what. Legible, you can actually read it. Contemporaneous, recorded as it happens. Original and accurate, those are pretty self-explanatory. And the plus just adds that it also has to be complete, consistent, enduring, and available. This is our target.
Okay, so here's our plan. We'll start with this problem of trust. Then we'll get into the solution, the 4Q roadmap. We're going to walk through each step, DQ, then IQ and OQ, and finally PQ. And we'll wrap up by talking about why this is never a one-and-done kind of deal.
So how do we solve this big problem of trust? Well, lucky for us, the industry has developed a really smart, standardized framework. It's a formal process that takes an instrument from just an idea all the way to a fully proven, trustworthy tool in the lab. The big word for this whole process is qualification. And honestly, it's just a fancy way of saying, let's prove this thing actually works. It's the documented, official proof that your equipment does what you expect it to do consistently. It's all about having the evidence to back it all up.
Now, this is a point that trips a lot of people up. What's the real difference between qualification and calibration? Well, think of it like this. Calibration is like tuning a single string on a guitar. You're just checking one small part against a known note. Qualification, on the other hand, is making sure the entire orchestra is playing the symphony perfectly. It's about the whole system being fit for purpose.
So let's dive into that official framework, the 4 Qs. The absolute best way to remember this is to think about preparing a race car. Step 1 is DQ, design qualification. That's your blueprint, designing the car for a specific race. Step 2 is IQ, installation qualification. You're in the garage, assembling every nut and bolt perfectly. Step 3, OQ, operational qualification. This is where you test the parts, fire up the engine, check the brakes. And finally, the moment of truth, PQ, performance qualification. You get it on the track to prove it can win. Design, install, operate, perform, that's the 4 Qs.
All right, first up, design qualification, or DQ. And you know, the wildest part about this first step is that it happens before you even buy the instrument. It starts way at the beginning with a really simple but absolutely critical question. What do we actually need this thing to do?
This is where you create probably the most important document in the whole process, the User Requirements Specification, or URS. Think of this as your detailed wish list. You formally document every single thing you need the instrument to do, the level of performance it has to hit, and the environment it's going to live in.
And this really hammers home the point. As the experts say, you simply can't qualify an instrument without a URS. And it makes total sense, right? How can you prove something is fit for purpose if you never actually wrote down what that purpose was to begin with? It's impossible.
Okay, so you've done your homework. You wrote an amazing URS, and a big, shiny new box has just been delivered to your lab. Awesome! Now we get to the really hands-on part, installation and operational qualification. This is all about making sure the instrument is built right and that all its individual pieces work perfectly.
Installation qualification, or IQ, is pretty much what it sounds like. It's your unboxing checklist on steroids. You're making sure all the parts and manuals are there, nothing got damaged in shipping, the lab environment has the right power and space, and every single cable is plugged in exactly according to the manufacturer's guide.
So once it's set up correctly, we move on to operational qualification, or OQ. Now we finally get to power it on and test every single function, module by module. Can the oven heat up to the right temperature? Is the gas flow controller accurate? We test each component all by itself to prove it meets its own specifications.
And look, these aren't just vague checks. OQ tests are super rigorous with predefined, non-negotiable limits. For example, if we set that column oven to 100 degrees Celsius, we need documented proof that it stays within, say, plus or minus 2 degrees. If it hits 102.1, it fails, period. The entire process stops right there until it's fixed. It's that black and white.
So we've designed it right, we've installed it right, and we've confirmed all the parts work on their own. Now it is time for the final exam, Performance Qualification, or PQ. This is where we test if the entire system can work together to produce reliable results under conditions that look just like a normal day in the lab. This is really where the rubber meets the road. We move beyond testing isolated parts and start running real-world analyses. We use the lab's actual methods and samples to generate that final piece of documented evidence that says, yes, this entire system working together is truly ready for the job.
And this is the kind of hard proof we're looking for. We run tests for things like precision, injecting the same sample over and over again to see if we get the exact same result. We also check for linearity. If we double the amount of sample, does the signal double? That beautiful straight line tells us it does. This data, this is the documented proof that underpins all of our trust.
Now, after all that work, it is so tempting to just check the box and say we're done. But one of the biggest mistakes people make is seeing qualification as a one-time event. To really maintain data integrity, you have to treat it like a continuous, living process.
Think of it like your car's safety inspection. It's not enough that it was safe when it rolled off the factory floor. It needs to remain safe throughout its entire life. It's the exact same principle for a scientific instrument. It has to be maintained in that qualified state for as long as it's being used to generate data.
And that means certain events automatically trigger the need to re-qualify. If you have a major repair or swap out a key component, you have to prove it's still working right. Even just moving the instrument to a different bench across the lab means you need to re-qualify. This ensures that our trust in the data is never, ever compromised.
So, is the data trustworthy? The 4Q qualification process gives you the documented, evidence-based answer. It's a tough journey, from just defining a need all the way to proving ongoing performance.
but it is the absolute bedrock that allows scientists, regulators, and really all of us to have confidence in the data that quite literally shapes our world.
Hey everyone, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the pharmaceutical industry. We're looking at the invisible but absolutely essential processes that make sure the medicine you take is safe and effective. Okay, let's get right into it.
So let's start with a scenario you've probably been in. You step on a scale at the pharmacy and it says you're 65 kilos, but then you get home, step on your own scale and it says 62. That's a 3-kilo difference. Which one is actually right? Which one do you trust?
Now let's just raise the stakes a little. Imagine that 3-kilo or 3-milligram difference isn't your body weight. Imagine it's the active ingredient in a heart medication. All of a sudden, that little discrepancy is a huge problem. You see, in the world of pharmaceuticals, precision isn't just a nice-to-have. It can literally be a matter of life and death.
And that really brings us to our first big point here, understanding why accuracy is the absolute foundation of everything in pharma.
You know, when those measurements are off, even just a tiny bit, the dominoes start to fall. It can lead to completely wrong drug formulations, meaning whole batches of medicine could be useless or even worse, dangerous. That in turn triggers major failures with something called Good Manufacturing Practice, or GMP guidelines, and that leads to incredibly expensive and reputation-destroying recalls. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to patient safety and the trust we all have in the medicines we depend on.
So how do these companies guarantee this insane level of precision? Well, it all starts with two core ideas that honestly get mixed up all the time but are completely different: calibration and validation.
Let's just break this down super simply. Think of calibration as tuning a single guitar to make sure it's perfectly in key. Validation, on the other hand, is about proving that the entire orchestra playing together consistently creates a beautiful piece of music. One is about the tool, the other is about the final result of the whole system.
So the key thing with calibration is that it focuses on one single piece of equipment. You take a pH meter, a thermometer, whatever it is, and you check its reading against a certified, known standard. If it's off, you tweak it and adjust it until it's dead on. This is what makes sure the data coming from that instrument is real and trustworthy.
Validation, though, zooms way out. It's not about just one instrument. It's about the entire process. So picture a giant machine that presses tablets. Validation is the proof that this machine, running under very specific conditions, will pump out tablets with the exact same weight, the exact same strength, the exact same dose. Every single time. Batch after batch. It's all about proving the process is stable, repeatable, and reliable.
Okay, so this table really lays it all out, right? Calibration's whole purpose is instrument accuracy. Validation's is process consistency. Calibration is laser-focused on the tools themselves, like a scale, but validation is looking at the whole shebang, like the entire packaging line, and check out the frequency. Calibration is a regular, scheduled thing, like a tune-up. Validation happens at the beginning, or after a huge change, or every now and then for reapproval.
But wait, there's actually a missing piece here, a bridge that connects our perfectly accurate instrument to our rock-solid validated process. And that bridge has a name: qualification.
Think of qualification as the official readiness check. See, before you can even dream of validating a process, you first have to prove that the equipment you're using is set up correctly and works exactly like it's supposed to. It's the documented proof that your machine is truly fit for the job.
And this is done in 3 really logical steps. First, you've got installation qualification, or IQ. This basically answers, are all the parts here? Is it plugged in right? Next comes operational qualification, or OQ, which asks, do all the buttons and alarms actually work? And finally, there's performance qualification, PQ, which is the real test. When we run it with actual materials under real conditions, does it do the job consistently?
And here's where it all comes together. This chart is perfect. Calibration gives you instrument accuracy. Qualification gives you equipment readiness, and validation proves process consistency. You just can't have one without the others. You can't validate a process without qualified equipment, and you can't qualify equipment without calibrated instruments. They're like different layers of a safety net.
Okay, that's enough theory. Let's see how this all works in the real world. we're going to put a really common piece of lab equipment, a UV visible spectrophotometer, under the microscope.
Now, this isn't just something companies decide to do for fun. As you can see here, regulatory bodies like the European Directorate for the Quality of Medicines have incredibly strict and detailed guidelines. These are non-negotiable, mandatory requirements for ensuring drug quality.
So we're going to zoom in on just one piece of this puzzle, the operational qualification, or OQ. This is where we put the core functions of this machine to the test to make absolutely sure it's working to spec before it ever touches a real sample.
First up is wavelength accuracy. We use a certified standard, like a holmium oxide solution, to check if the machine is seeing the correct wavelengths of light. Basically, we're making sure the instrument isn't colorblind, because if it is, it could totally misidentify a drug. And look at that acceptance criteria. It can't be off by more than 1 single nanometer. That is incredibly precise.
Next, we've got photometric accuracy. Here, using a different standard, we're checking if the instrument is measuring the amount of light correctly. This tells us how much of a drug is in our sample. It's not enough to see the right color, you have to measure its intensity perfectly. And the margin for error here is just 1/100th of an absorbance unit. Tiny.
All right, next up, we have to tackle something called stray light. This is basically unwanted light, like noise, that can hit the detector and mess up the reading. To test for it, we use a solution that should block all light at a specific wavelength, and we make sure that less than 1% of any junk light is getting through. It's kind of like soundproofing a recording studio to get a perfectly clean track. And finally, there's spectral resolution. This test is all about making sure the instrument can tell the difference between two very similar signals. As you can see in the diagram, a narrow, sharp peak means high resolution. It's the difference between looking at a blurry blob of light in the distance versus being able to see two distinct, separate headlights.
So, after all that pretty technical detail, nanometers, absorbance units, and spectral peaks, let's zoom back out and remember why any of this actually matters.
You know, this quote just hits the nail on the head. These aren't just boxes to check on some technical form. They are the absolute bedrock of patient safety, the guarantee of drug quality, and the entire foundation of the trust we put in these companies.
At the end of the day, it's all about this three-layered safety net. Calibration makes sure the tools are sharp. Qualification makes sure the tools are set up correctly and ready for the job. And validation proves that the entire job, the whole process, is done right every single time. Each layer is absolutely critical.
So the next time you take a simple pill, maybe you'll just take a second to think about this vast, invisible system of calibration, qualification, and validation that worked tirelessly behind the scenes, just to make sure what you're taking is safe, precise, and effective.
Have you ever really thought about what it takes to trust a piece of equipment? I don't just mean that it turns on, but that it works perfectly every single time, especially when actual lives are on the line. Okay, let's get into it and take a look at how you validate something like a super freezer. So take a look at this. You know, it might just look like a very cold, frosty box, right? But what's inside? Wow, we're talking millions in temperature-sensitive medicines, maybe critical vaccines, or even biological samples that add up to an entire lifetime of research. The stakes? They could not be higher. And that's the whole point, right there. A tiny, tiny fluctuation in temperature, just a couple of degrees off, and all of that value, all of that potential to save lives or make a huge discovery, it could all be gone. Just like that. Completely worthless. So yeah, this is obviously about so much more than just keeping things cold. This first part is all about understanding those incredible stakes and really getting why things like certainty and safety are absolutely non-negotiable. And you know, this isn't some niche problem. Across the entire life sciences industry, the safety and the effectiveness of the products we all count on, well, it all hinges on one critical thing: precise and, more importantly, proven temperature control. It's kind of like an invisible guarantee that the medicine you might take is safe and is actually going to work the way it's supposed to. So, how do we get that proof?
Well, it's not a suggestion, it's not a best practice, it is a straight-up mandate from regulatory bodies all over the globe. Let's take a look at what that really means.
See, this whole process isn't optional. It's mandated by huge global agencies like the World Health Organization and the FDA. It's a core piece of what's called GXP, or Good Manufacturing Practices. And the ultimate goal? It's simple, but it's tough. To create documented, verifiable proof that a piece of equipment is absolutely fit for the job it's meant to do. And what's really wild is the scale of this. The exact same rigorous principles apply whether you're validating a tiny freezer in a lab or a colossal warehouse-sized cold storage facility. The process, the rules, they're universal. Okay, so how is it actually done? Well, it all boils down to a very formal 3-step process. It's all designed to build undeniable, documented trust in that piece of equipment.
The official name for this whole shebang is qualification, and the World Health Organization defines it as the action of proving that your equipment and all its systems work correctly and give you the results you expect. You see that word again and again, proving.
Now, this process unfolds in 3 distinct stages, and you have to do them in order. First up, you have installation qualification, or IQ. Then comes operational qualification, or OQ. And finally, the big one, performance qualification, or PQ. So let's actually unpack what each of those really means. To make this super easy, let's start with an analogy. That first step, IQ, just think of it as the blueprint check. It's the absolute foundation. And the IQ process itself is, well, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's all about verifying the basic facts on the ground. Does the model number on the freezer match what you ordered? Is it installed in the right place with the right power source? Do you have all the manuals and the calibration certificates? And did you check it for any damage when it was unpacked? It's that essential first step, just confirming you have the right tool and it's installed the right way. Okay, let's move on to the next 2 stages and their analogies. Operational qualification, or OQ. That's the empty stress test. Then you have performance qualification, PQ, which is the real-world gauntlet. Now, they sound kind of similar, but the difference between them is absolutely critical. So OQ happens when the freezer is completely empty. You're testing every single function, every button, every alarm to make sure it works exactly like the manufacturer said it would. But PQ is the true test. The freezer is now loaded with either the real product or something that simulates it, and you're verifying that it performs consistently under the stress of real-world conditions. You know, people opening doors, daily use. Empty versus loaded. That is the key difference. Right, so how in the world do you gather all the data to prove performance during OQ and PQ? I mean, you can't just trust the little number on the front of the door. You literally have to map what's invisible. See, here's the thing. A freezer isn't one single uniform temperature inside. There are always these tiny variations, invisible hot spots and cold spots. That single temperature display on the outside, it doesn't tell you the whole story, not even close. To get the real picture, you have to do what's called a temperature map, using a whole grid of independent sensors. The whole process kicks off with this little guy, a high-precision, independently calibrated sensor. It's called a data logger, and it's designed to do just one thing, but do it perfectly. Accurately record temperature over time. And of course, you don't use just one. You place multiple data loggers all throughout the freezer in this really strategic, pre-planned grid. You want to cover every possible spot, high, low, front, back, all the corners, and right in the center to get a complete thermal profile of that entire space. So these loggers just sit there and record data continuously, usually for 24 hours, maybe more. And what you get is a graph that looks like this. Each one of those lines represents a different sensor. The goal, the dream, is to see all those lines stay packed super tightly together, all inside your required temperature range. That visual right there, that is your documented proof that the whole chamber is stable and uniform. But hold on, passing this test once isn't the end of the story. This is not a one-and-done kind of deal. It's really a living, breathing process of trust and verification. A successful qualification doesn't just give you a thumbs up for that moment. It sets up a whole system for the future. You establish things like continuous monitoring and alarms. You create a formal procedure for how to handle any changes, and you define exactly what would trigger a full requalification, like a big repair, a modification, or even just moving the freezer across the room.
And this is the really intelligent part. It's not just about blindly ticking boxes on a schedule, it's a smart, risk-based approach. If a unit consistently passes its mapping with flying colors every single time, you might actually be able to extend the time between doing it all over again. The data from its own performance history guides the process. It makes it both really robust and efficient.
And at the end of the day, it all comes back to this. Every check, every sensor, every single piece of paper, it's all in service of one ultimate goal: guaranteeing patient safety and ensuring the absolute integrity of the products that we all depend on. So in the end, this whole rigorous process of validation, it ensures that from the lab all the way to the pharmacy, a promise is being kept. It's one of these incredible, invisible systems of trust that's always working behind the scenes. And it really makes you wonder, right? What other invisible processes are out there protecting you every single day?